In case you missed it, and you probably did, because I don't think there was a huge tune-in factor for this one, Gavin Newsom and Ron DeSantis, California versus Florida, they had a debate on Fox. And this is, well, one of those that's sort of like the undercard debate, the B-team debate, so to speak, and designed to kind of gin up some excitement, some interest. But let's be honest, no one's really excited about Ron DeSantis or Gavin Newsom, for that matter. So let's just start there. Anyway, it kind of just went off the rails in various points, and we can talk about that. That may have been lack of skill, both in terms of the moderator, lack of skill in terms of the producers, and then just lack of skill in terms of the two candidates, right? Uno, dos there. When you start talking about the poop app, right? I don't know. I think at that point, you just better throw in the towel. This is Ron DeSantis trying to go after Gavin Newsom for the mess that San Francisco has become. And I realize that this crystallizes it in a way that we can all kind of visualize, and we wish we didn't have to. But I also think it was pretty unpresidential. So, shall we just say that, right? Let your surrogates do this. You don't need to pull out a map and show everyone where the human feces is. Watch.
Well, I'm looking at total time. Governor DeSantis, about 2 minutes.
This is a map of San Francisco. There's a lot of plots on that. You may be asking, what is that plotting? Well, this is an app where they plot the human feces that are found on the streets of San Francisco. And you see how almost the whole thing is covered, because that is what has happened in one of the previous greatest cities this country's ever had. Human feces is now a fact of life, except when a communist dictator comes to town. Then they cleaned up the streets. They lined the streets with Chinese flags. They didn't put American flags there. They cleaned everything up. So they're willing to do it for a communist dictator, but they're not willing to do it for their own people.
I want to get in with the limited time we have left. I want to get, there are two very important.
I mean, I don't dispute it, right? It was amazing how quickly they cleaned up San Francisco for China, for the big conference that they held there recently. But again, it just kind of doesn't feel right. And it turned into, dare I say, kind of an attack fest for Gavin Newsom to go after Ron DeSantis. And I'm like, wait, what are we doing here? It was supposed to be like a policy debate, effectively. Socialism versus capitalism. Which one wins? You know the answer on that one, guys, right? And yet, this happened.
Well, I love the rant on freedom. I mean, here's a guy who's criminalizing teachers, criminalizing doctors, criminalizing librarians, and criminalizing women that seek their reproductive care. You're making it harder to vote. You're banning books. I mean, spare me this notion of freedom. Ask the folks at Disney about freedom and free enterprise. Ask the folks at the Special Olympics that you threatened to fine with $27 million.
Because they were discriminating against the athletes.
Who goes after
those
Special Olympians?
To
when it comes to the issue,
Down syndrome,
Ron, of homelessness.
that is wrong. That's being a liberal bully. That's being a bully.
Really?
They had Down syndrome, and you wanted to discriminate against them.
$27 million
They were discriminating against
Special
because they were discriminating against the athletes. They wanted to marginalize the athletes, and you wanted the athletes marginalized. That was wrong what you did. These are kids with Down syndrome that just wanted to compete.
I grew up working
aid
to adoption
you wanted
of special kids. I've been working with Special Olympians all my life.
You wanted them to be. You wanted them
They're
to be
talking over each other.
You threatened
over and over each other.
Isabella from Florida.
Come on, Andy.
She got to participate because we stood up for her.
This is how you treat.
Oh my goodness!
By the way,
no, hold on.
No, let me say, I can handle that. I can handle it. I'm used to that. But you know what?
You wanted her
your attacks on the trans community, your attack on the gay and lesbian community.
That's wrong.
You attack vulnerable communities. You attack women.
And we made sure they could compete.
Ron, relax. I can handle it. I'm used to bullying. You're nothing but a bully.
You're a bully.
I understand that. Intimidating and humiliating people, that's your calling card.
Why did you want the Special Olympians not to be able to compete?
How well is it going for you?
Why did you want them not to be able to compete?
How well is this campaign going?
Why do you not want them to be able to compete?
He's not going to let me talk, so
I don't understand why you would want to discriminate against
I'll remind you, the blueprint.
He wanted them to be
excluded from the Florida
Olympics.
Has put Ron DeSantis 41 points down to Donald Trump as you try to get tough.
We said that.
Out Trump.
Let's go back to the homelessness.
The issue of homelessness has been an issue for decades in the making in the state of California. Ever since we started shuttering down our mental health institutions back in the day.
You know what? That's not going to rate. It's just not going to rate well. So I don't really know what the point was. I mean, Hannity's, he's not really the guy you go to, right? For very nice guy, by the way. I like him a ton, but he's not really like the policy guy. So it's not really something that you would really seek out, right? If you're trying to have this, dare I say communism? I can't really say that, right? It's still socialism in San Francisco. I mean, they're working towards it, in other ways, shapes and forms. But it's a socialist sort of mentality that's governing the state there versus red-blooded American capitalism, which is Florida. Although he's not perfect, by the way. Like DeSantis has done a few things that sometimes kind of make us scratch our head. All that said, it was a bad night for him. It was a bad night because he doesn't have the political je ne sais quoi. I use this term a bit. I've always used it because I think it really does matter. And if you consider what's successful in television, what's successful in politics, oftentimes it's the personality that can relate to the viewer. So Reagan was super successful on that front. And, Carter, forget about it. He didn't have that. Mondale did not have that. Bill Clinton had it, right? This is not a partisan thing, guys. Obama, for all you want to, he didn't have the common touch, but he had in front of the camera at the appropriate times an ability to sound really polished and really good. So he was that shiny new toy. Gavin Newsom has that. Biden does not. Donald Trump has always had that. I mean, you look at Donald Trump, right? Like here he is the other night with Tucker Carlson and Kid Rock, and he's having a grand old time.
How strong that team is.
Actually, he's not really smiling as much. In that shot. There you go.
One of the bigger mixed martial arts fans, I know President Donald Trump taking his octagon side seat for UFC 295.
He actually likes that. I can tell you that. I've known him long enough to know that he really does actually like being at those events. There was a former commentator on Fox that used to work on the Reagan, in the Reagan White House, Ed Rollins. And I remember Ed once saying that Donald Trump reminded him in some ways of Reagan. When Reagan was in the White House, he really needed to get out in front of the crowd. He needed to do those campaign rallies because that's where he really got a ton of energy from. And Donald Trump is very much like that as well. He just loves to get out there, talk to the people, and sort of, be one with them and feed off of their energy. And I think that that's a distinction between, say, Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis. Now, do with that what you will. There are a lot of people who say, well, hey, that's what's wrong with America. They're too celebrity driven and these politicians are too about let me have attention. And there's a problem with that. But I do think that having sort of some appreciation for the base, for the conservatives in the party, that matters. And, he's not even necessarily Donald Trump that is the most conservative. In fact, he was a former Democrat. But I think he's spoken a lot of common sense about policy, whether it be the border, whether it be overseas, whether it be the economy, his tax policy. I read the whole thing in 2016. I came away saying, wow, this one's actually really good. It's a really good tax policy. By the way, we did well by it as an economy. So, he's got other issues that sometimes hinder him, right? And make it harder for him. So some of that's been self-inflicted, if you will. But when you look at the actual policy itself and who he is as a person, he genuinely likes people. Ron DeSantis, on the other hand, I don't get the feeling he really likes people. I think about the times that I was on television with him and those commercial breaks. They'd just be awkward, right? Whereas Donald Trump would be like, hey, let's chat. It's very, very, very different kinds of people. And that personal touch, it's needed. It really is. I think it's needed in a winning candidate. Look, Gavin's got the squeaky, clean, shiny image that they're going to try and chip away at, and they may be successful at that. You can see the opposition research, right, already coming in. But I just get back to policy and free market policy and good, strong tax policy. Look, DeSantis has had a good record. You look at what he did in Florida, very, very smart in March 2020 versus the rest of the country, versus California. Schools stayed open for the most part, right? There was a brief shutdown and then people were open. I talked to friends and they were in Florida and I was in the Northeast outside New York City and everything was locked down. Everything was locked down. I mean, you couldn't go anywhere. And my friends in Florida were like, oh yeah, we're going out to a steak dinner tonight. And I'm like, you're kidding, right? And so that was a for sure success story for Ron DeSantis. So he ought to be hitting those economic issues over and over and over again, but he kind of gets lost in his way. It's partly his personality. There's other like little things that I could nitpick, and I don't want to be unkind, but little things, they matter, right? Your voice matters. And you hear his very nasal. I mean, one of the first things, if I were on the campaign team, I'd say, get that guy some voice lessons, like today. And by the way, this is coming from somebody who's a former opera singer, right? So classical training, etc. I know a few things about this. The voice has got to get out of the nose. It sounds like shallow, and it probably is. I'm not going to like discount that. But you know what? You want to win. You want to win. He lost a few pounds. Okay. So what about the rest of the package? And then I'd also say, you know what? You got to have some compassion. You got to be able to be self-deprecating. Donald Trump did that really well. Remember the time that he joked about the orange bulbs, the light bulbs? He didn't like these new energy efficient light bulbs because they made them look really orange. He said, some people tell me I'm orange. It's that kind of stuff. It's being able to kind of laugh at yourself. Ron DeSantis doesn't have that. He takes himself very, very, very seriously. Anyway, this debate, as far as I'm concerned, and this is somebody who's moderated, by the way, to Republican presidential debates there at Fox Business, I would just say they kind of made it a free-for-all. It was like a giant slugfest. And when people are talking over each other like that, it's never helpful. And you know what? That's very old-fashioned to me. That's like old-fashioned cable. That was an old-fashioned cable event that Fox News put on, where everybody just attacks each other. Because actually out in the real world, like over here, reminder, subscribe to the channel. Thank you for doing so. In the real world, we actually do want to have substantive conversations, and we want thoughtful exchange. And maybe that's what that was intended to be, but clearly it went off the rails in a very big way. And I don't think did Ron DeSantis any favors at all. Therefore, it didn't really help necessarily Republicans. It probably helped Donald Trump. Donald Trump, unless they're somehow able to put him behind bars, he will be the nominee. And now the question becomes, who will be his vice presidential pick? What do you think? Might it be this guy?
First of all, on the crazy train there, how do you feel about Trump saying he would consider you for vice president?
Oh, gosh, I don't know. I put that in the category of asteroids striking the Earth. Good or bad, it's so far outside of my control that I'm flattered.
Yeah, it is flattering, isn't it?
For sure. But I mean, it's hard to, I've never been in politics.
Would you ever do it?
Would I accept?
Yeah, if you really asked
think about that. I mean, I spent my whole life looking at politicians and commenting on them and passing judgment on them. And I've never run for, room mother. And so the idea of that is so far from anything I've ever done. It's kind of hard even to imagine.
What do you think?
I certainly support Trump. I'll tell you that. And I can tell you, I've always agreed with Trump's policies, always. And I lost friends over it. And I've never really actively supported anybody because it's not my job to actively support people. I watch, I'm
going to stop for a minute because he's right. I mean, this is the distinction, right, between people in politics and people in the media. And hopefully people in the media are not actively supporting, because that kind of crosses a line from which I don't think you can return. It's why I keep my powder dry and I try and be as honest and forthcoming as I can. And it may even include things about somebody's voice, right? But the reality is, it's the policy at the end of the day that I'm trying to analyze. Aside from the voice stuff, like it's superficial, I get it. But the policy is what matters. And Tucker's right. In other words, it's very different to be on that side of things where you're actually in the game in a very, very different way. So let's continue listening.
I like to watch. But I'm a voyeur.
Yeah.
But I became an active Trump supporter when they raided Mar-a-Lago last summer, the summer of 2022. That can't stand.
No, that can't.
And
that was something.
Agree with Trump on a lot. But even if I disagreed with Trump on a lot, I'd still be a Trump supporter because you cannot allow that. You cannot allow the regime, the president of the United States, to use the Justice Department to knock the front runner out of the race. You can't do that.
No, you can't do that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people feel very strongly about that. That was pretty just darn outrageous. And it continues to get more outrageous. I mean, I, as a business reporter, keep going back to the case there with the New York judge and the attorney general and Letitia James and the idea that somehow a private transaction between a bank and an individual like Donald Trump can suddenly come under this kind of scrutiny to the point where they're going to kick him out of the state and, say, hey, we're taking some assets and you're done with your business. That feels like very dictator-like to me, very Venezuelan-like, dare I say. I think Hugo Chavez pulled a few moves like that. That's actually pretty scary. And so it, in many ways, helps to solidify his position in the hearts and minds of many people that are not, say, extreme conservatives. Like there are independents now that are like, wait a second, if they're doing that to him, what does it really mean? So I think it'll be all very interesting to see, but the undercard debate, forget about it. And I know, knowing what I know about television, there's always early ratings that come out. And if it's a really good event, really good night, right, they're going to publicize that. And I'm looking. And we're now going into the weekend. I'm not seeing anything on those ratings. So I'm betting they weren't so good. Why would they be? Je ne sais quoi. I'll leave you with that. Hey, don't forget to subscribe. The subscribe button is right there. I'm like pointing to it, I think, something like that. Anyway, good to see you all, and we'll talk some more.